Hello students, in the series of general anatomy lectures we have learnt about the skin, then we have also learnt about the superficial fascia and the deep fascia. Now, then you will ask why we are going to the skeletal system directly without learning the muscles which are present deep to the deep fascia, blood vessels and the nerves. Bones are deeply situated. Okay. Now there are two reasons for this. The first is that the bones and joint they form the skeletal framework of our body which gives the shape to our body, and everything is in relation to this shape. Okay. Now second reason is that the bones also gives attachment to the skeletal muscles, and without learning the bones we will not be able to understand, okay, about the muscles. So it is important to learn bone first and then learn about the muscle, their origin and insertion onto the bones, right? And this was the reason why we have taken the skeletal system first. Today is the first lecture on the skeletal system. There will be many more lecture on skeletal system. This is just an introduction, so it is an important lecture. Now I am moving to the second slide where we will just learn about the skeletal system. Skeletal system consists of bones and cartilage. That means these are the two structure, bones and cartilage, which are responsible for formation of the skeletal system. Now, though the bones are there in a large quantity, I would say large number to form the skeleton, okay, but uh, there are some cartilaginous contribution also. For example, the cartilages are present at the ends of long bones which are called as articular cartilage. Then some portion of the skeletal system is also formed by the cartilage, for example costal cartilages, which are present at the anterior ends of the ribs. Now, after this brief introduction to the skeletal system, let us first come on to the function of the skeletal system. Okay, many functions are there in the skeletal system, but the most important of this, as I said, it is to give the shape to the body. So the skeletal system gives shapes to the body because the bones along with the joints they provide the basic skeletal framework of our body. We are identified as human being because of the structure of our skeletal system. Okay, and our I mean say structure is quite different from any other animals in the kingdom. Okay, animal kingdom. Now second important function is the protection. Most of the vital organ of the body they are very well protected by the this skeletal system. For example, our brain, which is a very delicate organ, is well protected within the skull. Similarly, in thoracic cage, okay, there are presence of the two lungs, right and left, and the heart, and other organs of the body are also protected by the skeletal system. Okay. Third function is the movements. As I said that skeletal muscles are attached onto the bones, and when they contract they move that bone on a joint, and because of that the movements takes place. The uh, our running, our jumping, our sitting, okay, our walking is all due to the contraction of the skeletal muscle and movement of the bones on joints. Okay, so both muscle and the uh, skeletal system forms a very important uh, another system of the body, what is called as the musculoskeletal system or the locomotory system, and because of this muscles and bones we are moving. Okay, now the fourth function of the skeletal system is the storage of minerals. Most of the minerals okay, they are deposited in the bones. Okay, say for example, calcium and phosphorus, they are deposited in a very huge quantity within our bone. That means 99% of our calcium is within our bones. Only 1% circulates inside the blood. Now, this storage of minerals is regulated by this storehouse, that is the bones. Whenever calcium is less, okay, in the blood, then this moves from the bones, okay, to the blood. And whenever the level of calcium is more in the blood, then it comes from blood and gets deposited into the bones, right? Then the fifth function of the skeletal system is that it provides the, I mean to say, blood cells. Okay, the blood cells means RBC, white blood cells, okay, and platelets. All are produced within the bone marrow. And what is bone marrow? It is nothing but the bone forming cells, bone forming tissue, which is present within the marrow cavity of our bones. Okay. Now, the last function is the storage of adipose tissue. Where is this adipose tissue stored in our bone? Okay, I said that there is the presence of the bone marrow within the marrow cavity of our tissue. In most of the bones in an adult, the marrow cavity contains the yellow bone marrow, which is rich in the adipose tissue or fat cells. Okay, only the ends of the long bone, they contain the red bone marrow, which is are the sites for formation of the blood cells. Okay, so there are many functions of the skeletal system. Okay, let's go to the next slide where we will see what is the classification of the skeletal system. Okay, the skeletal system as such is having the two different parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So axial skeleton is are those bones of the skeleton which are located in the median axis or central axis of our body or close to the median plane. Okay, and these bones, they are called as axial bones of the axial skeleton. For example, if I just uh, take my pointer to the bones, various bones of the axial skeleton. This is the skull, which is the part of the axial skeleton as it is located in median plane. Okay, then vertebral column, many vertebrae, say for example, cervical vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, and then the lumbar and sacral vertebrae, they form the uh, vertebral column, and all these belongs to the axial skeletons. Okay, then there is a small bone in the neck called as the hide bone, and then in front of chest there is a midline bone which is called as the sternum, and to the this sternum many ribs, okay, they are attached, okay, to this sternum, and thus the ribs, they are also the part of the axial skeleton. So now you know that what are the bones which belongs to the axial skeleton. Let's now come to the second part of the skeleton, that is called as the appendicular skeleton. And appendicular skeleton means the bones belonging to the limbs, upper limb or the lower limb, including the girdles. For example, in this upper limb, if you see the girdle bones, they are the clavicle and scapula. They form shoulder or pectoral girdle. Then the bones of the upper limb are humerus, radius ulna, the carpal bones, the bones of the wrist, and then metacarpal bones, the bones of the hand, and the phalanges, which are the bones of the finger. Similarly, for lower limb, the girdle bone is the hip bone, then the thigh bone is the femur, tibia and fibula are the leg bones, then the tarsal bones and the metatarsal and phalanges. So these are the part of the appendicular skeleton. I think this is quite easy. You have already learned. Let's move to the next. Now, the question some student they ask as soon as they come to the medical school, how many bones are present in our skeleton? So the answer is that there are 206 bone in the adult human skeleton. Adult. But this is not a fixed number. The bones may be more or bones may be sometime less. Mostly they are more. So because there are some extra bones present in various part of the skeleton. For example, there are the sutural bones present in the skull. So the number increases. But for a normal adult human, there are 206 bones. Now then you will ask a question, how many of these belongs to the axial skeleton and how many of these belong to that of the appendicular skeleton? And for the axial skeleton, if we calculate the bones, they are 80 bones, 80 bones, including 3 small bones which are present in the our middle ear. They are called as the auditory ossicles, that is stapes, incus and malleus. Okay, that you will learn later. Okay, now in the appendicular skeleton there are 126 bones. So this was just a brief about the bones present in our body. Let's come to the gross structure of an adult living long bone. See these wordings. Okay, it is the gross structure. Okay, so the anatomy which you are going to learn by just seeing naked eye about the living bone. Living bone means your bone and my bone which are present in our body, they are living bone. Okay, and long bones means mostly those bones which are present in the limbs, upper limb or the lower. So we will learn the gross structure of a long bone which is living, not dead. The dead bones which you will handle in your dissection hall or in your demonstration class, they are not living, they are dead. Okay, and I will tell you the difference between a living and a dead bone. Here you just understand what are the parts of a living long bone. Here, a living long bone consists of a shaft. Shaft means body and its two ends. This is upper end which is also called as proximal epiphysis. Epiphysis. This is new term for you. Okay. And then there is a lower epiphysis or the distal epiphysis or the lower end. Epiphyses are the ends, they are the ends. Okay, so anatomically you should call it as epiphysis to the ends. Okay, layman can call the ends of the long bone. Okay, now body is between, which lies between two ends, it is cylindrical. Okay, mostly cylindrical. Mostly at many places it may contain the borders and surfaces, but most of the time it is cylindrical. Okay, now this whole bone right from at the ends, let me I forgot to mention that the ends of the long bone which are called as epiphyses, okay, they are covered by hyaline cartilage. Okay, and this hyaline cartilage is also known as articular cartilage because this cartilage comes in contact with the other bone, opposite bone, to form the joint. And articular means joint. Okay, so it will form the joint. That's why this hyaline cartilage is called as artery, which is present at both the ends, the upper end and the lower end in a long bone. Then the shaft of the body, including the ends, okay, just from the margins of this articular cartilage, is covered by a membrane, and this membrane completely covers except the area which are covered by the articular cartilage. So remember what is articular cartilage, what is epiphysis, okay, and what is this membrane known as. This membrane is called as the periosteum, which I will show you in the next diagram again. So that membrane covering to a living bone is the periosteum. Okay, now in this long bone at many places blood vessels and nerve will be entering. Okay, they will be many excuse me, they will be many at the ends. Okay, because ends are broad. Okay, as compared to the shaft, many blood vessels will go, but then there is a major artery which is going in the shaft through a foramina called as nutrient foramina, and the artery which is going in this foramina is called as the nutrient artery. Remember that. Okay, so along with the nerves and lymphatics. Okay, this will not be only the blood vessel which will be going through the nutrients foramina, it will be the nerves and the lymphatics too. Okay, now we will move after learning these ants, but let me tell you one more thing. Okay, here, what is metaphysis? Okay, if you just see the different parts of this long bone, ants, I have said that they are called as the uh, proximal epiphysis and distal epiphysis. You know by this time what is proximal and what is distal. Okay, and then the remaining expanded part, okay, of these ants, okay, away from the ants, not of the ant but away from the ant, but at the towards the diaphysis, which is the central part of the long bone, is called as the diaphysis, or body is called as metaphysis. So how many parts are there in long bone? Proximal epiphysis, metaphysis, diaphysis, and again the metaphysis, and then the distal epiphysis. Okay, this is called as distal. So these are the parts of a living long bone. Move to next slide. Now this is a cross section, longitude, not sorry, cross, this is a longitudinal section, okay, passing through the upper end of the bone, which we just saw in the previous slide. And in this longitudinal section you can see two different kind of bone at the ends, which are expanded, bulky. Okay, their core or inside is formed by the spongy bone, which looks like a sponge containing lot of spaces. Okay, and these spaces are filled with the bone marrow. Okay, they are filled with the bone marrows. And then there is the other bone which is lining to the metaphysis and diaphysis, is the compact bone. So second bone is the compact, which doesn't contain any space, and it is, that's why called as the compact bone. And in the center of this bone, which is tubular in structure, there is a cavity called as the marrow cavity. Okay, this is called as marrow cavity. So there is a spongy bone which is at the ends, which spongy bone is also covered by a very thin layer of the compact bone. The other end of these ends, as I said, is covered by the articular cartilages. Okay, the marrow cavity, which is filled in the living condition by the bone marrow, blood forming marrow, that is here, or the yellow bone marrow is here. This cavity is also lined by an epithelial lining called as endosteum, that is called as endosteum. And the fibrous membrane, which starts from the margin of articular cartilage and covers the whole bone here all around, this membrane is called as periosteum. We will learn the structure of periosteum later. Just remember that it is a membrane covering to the long bone. Okay, long bone. So this is the structure, inside structure of a living long bone. Okay, in first slide we saw, our previous slide we saw just a gross structure from outside, and here is the structure from inside. Okay, now a living long bone thus consists of the following part. What are those following part? It consists of a shaft or body. See this, from metaphysis of one side to the metaphysis of the other side. This is called as the shaft. That means shaft consists of two parts. The central part, which is the long part, is called diaphysis, and just near the epiphysis or ends, that is an expanded part of the diaphysis itself, and that is called as the meta. So the metaphysis are two: upper metaphysis near the upper end, and this is the metaphysis near the lower. In cross section you can also see this part is the metaphysis. Okay, right, then there are two ends, upper end and the lower end. Okay, and these ends are covered by articular cartilage. Here see in the cross section the articular cartilage, and this articular cartilage are present at both the ends and they form the joint. Okay, and that means they come in contact with the other bone, which is also covered by the articular cartilage. Then the outer membrane, here see this dotted line, this outer membrane is called as the periosteum. Let me go to the last slide. Probably I will not be able to go. Anyway, that is called as periosteum, and inside the marrow cavity there is a bone marrow. Now coming to the last slide, after learning the gross structure of a living long bone, you should note that, okay, once you have, I mean to say, noted and understood what I have said you in the last slides, many or 6 or 7 slide, this is this has to be understood you because bone is a living tissue. The first point which you should note or understand, the bone is a living tissue. Why we say that it is a living tissue? Because it is forming and destroyed. Okay, it is being formed and destroyed. Okay, so it is a living tissue. It is just supplied by the blood vessels and nerve. Okay, some part of the bone are constantly formed and then destroyed. So we can say that bone is not only a living tissue, but since the bony tissue within a bone in a living bone are forming constantly after the uh, when the bone formation is complete, that is called as ossification is completed, the tissue of the bone keep on forming and at the same time it is destroyed. That means new bone is always coming and the old is destroyed. So it is said to be a dynamic tissue also. So not only it is a living, but it is a dynamic tissue also, right? So you should differentiate between a living bone and a dead bone, because a living bone is will have many structure which dead bone, which you will handle in your practical classes, say demonstration or dissection hall, will not have. For example, a dead bone which you will handle will not have the articular cartilage, it will fall off due to drying. It will not have the periosteal membrane, the outer covering, because it will also dry. Okay, after drying it will fall off, okay, from the bone surface. And then endosteum you will not be having. Bone marrow which was filling the cavity, okay, red and the yellow, will not be there inside the living long bone. And then it will not be having the blood vessels, nerves and lymphatics, okay. So that is the difference between the living and dead bone which you will handle in your dissection hall, okay. It is another important aspect is bone is not just a simple structure, okay, which is forming the framework or having the locomotory structure, okay, helping in movements, but it is also similar to an organ. For example, any other organ will have a particular structure and then it will have many functions in organ. Similarly, the bone contain tissues other than the bone tissues, okay. So there are not only the bony tissue inside, okay, the bone, but it contains the blood vessel, it contains the nerves, lymphatics, bone marrow, periosteum and osteum, articular cartilages, so many tissue that it makes it as something like an organ. And then it has many functions, we have already read many function of the bones. Thus bone is not a simple structure, okay, which previously was thought by student as a dead structure in body. It is not, it is dynamic living structure. I hope you have understood. Thank you very much.